we're pretty fucking happy tonight. All right. Excuse my Polish there. All right. Well, this has been a long project, and we couldn't have gotten here without lots of support. I was just telling our friend Bill Money that this book project's been like any other campaign, any other attempt to change the world, which you and us have spent a lot of time doing, trying to change the world, and I'll try not to swear too much. But the world needs to be changed, it still does. I want you to take a look at all the exhibits out there. There's a lot to learn. We don't have time to talk about that tonight, but there's a lot of those exhibits were put together by, or saved by Juan, myself, and people who lent us their life's documents, especially Nancy McClintock, Corey Miller. So I feel obligated. The people we interviewed, I think we felt obligated to do a good job to the people who told us their story. It's people who many of us have worked with over many, many years. But it was a learning process for us. We weren't able to interview everybody we probably should have or could have. Sort of time and resources were what they are, which is true on any campaign, any risk that people take as troublemakers, agitators, community organizers. You're never fully funded. You don't have unlimited time. You got to do with what you got. Okay? I just made that up. So let me get back to my script here. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank you all for what you do. It's not so much about us. We just decided that this had to get done, and part of it was an extension of the Bracero Memorial Highway project that we did 2 years ago. That was pretty much Juan's idea to honor labor, specifically Mexican nationals who came here during World War II to help fight fascism and help the United States do that. And it was, but you can talk to Juan when we break up more about that. If you're not sure what the Bracero Memorial or what the Bracero program was. But I also want to I got some thank yous to do. I know usually these are not the most exciting part of the night, but you know, if you don't thank people, then so I want to thank, of course, Karen and Juan for committing to the time it took, the energy it took. This took longer than we thought. We somehow had no idea that it would take this much time.
And thank you, Gary, for the wonderful inspiration and leadership. Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Monterey Peninsula for providing a location today and a year ago when we were here, and we asked folks to help us show support so we knew we could do this. Required raising some money, which we did, about $12,000. I also want to thank Heidi Feldman. Where's Heidi? Heidi's my partner. And of course, your partner always suffers when you're doing stuff like this, you know, because it's like you're not home, you know. So, thank you, Heidi. I want to thank everyone we interviewed. Most people agreed to be interviewed. There were some people who did not. But we got it, and we tried to cross the lettuce curtain, cross all kinds of divides that exist in our society. People who struggled for rights and for justice and peace, but probably didn't always know each other. We want to thank the people who contributed money, of course. Money's not always a bad thing. Well, you need money to make certain things happen. You know, we got assistance from many people to help us transcribe and edit. Patricia Hamilton was our publisher, lives in PG. I would recommend her to you if you're thinking of publishing your memoirs. She was very helpful to get us to a printer. Our printer was Community Printers in Santa Cruz, a union shop. Yeah. As you might imagine, we didn't go to China to get this book printed. Let's see. We also want to thank the Monterey Peace and Justice Center for being our fiscal sponsor. We want to thank our visionary senator, Bill Monning, for writing a foreword to the book and being who he is, a visionary, someone who's always a pleasure to be with. And I'm glad he's here with us tonight. So I think I'll shorten my comments here, but we're done. Yeah, we thanked everybody. Anyway, we'll have a chance to talk after these formal comments, but so the schedule tonight is we're going to be a few comments here. We're going to ask Bill to come up and speak, and Professor Reichert from CSUMB, who we've been working with, and he'll talk more about that. We have a book, and you can. I forgot to tell you about the book. There's my notes. Karen's pointing to me. Book. The book's $20. This is not a money-making operation. We would like to sell all the books, and we would like to be able to, print more books or use funds to help further explain the progressive history that's gone on. This county was very active. You read books about California history and U.S. history, and Howard Zinn didn't even talk much about the West Coast. And let alone Monterey County. But a lot happened here. A lot really did happen here. The United Farm Workers Union, around the fields in Salinas, around the prison, around Soledad Prison, and around Fort Ord, back when it was the training base. So a lot of that's in the exhibits out there, and we can talk about that later this evening. After, we're going to have a few more comments from Bill and David Reichert. But first, we thought it would be a fair and honorable thing to do to have a quick read from 6 of the interviewees. And so Juan and Ann McDowell and Karen are going to read a brief excerpt from 6 people. Trying to think of something brief that would give you the flavor of the book. It was such a joy. Come on up, Ann, here. It was such a joy to interview people and learn more about you. And I've learned a lot about people who many of us have been on picket lines. We've been in committee meetings. We've done all kinds of work together to try to create a better world, but we don't always talk about ourselves that much. So people, trying to get people to talk about themselves. Some people, it was tough. It was tough to get them to want to talk about themselves. Other people were overflowing with, I got to tell my stuff. Either way, it was a joy. It really was. So I appreciate everybody who said okay to be interviewed, and this part of it's not to lose what we did, and that it's used to create more change in society. That's what we want. We've always wanted. Society has improved because of the work we did, but not enough. And it's probably something that's never going to end. The struggle to constantly revitalize democracy, minimize the influence of militarism in our policy, and racism in our society. So it's a constant struggle. We know that. So at first, what we're we're going to do now is Juan's going to go first. We're going to read a quick excerpt from the first person here, which Juan will explain who it is, and then read from the book, Voices of Changes, and then pass it along to Ann, and then Ann to Karen. So the first one for Tony is this paragraph right there, and then this paragraph.
Gary, I should have told you that when I was in grammar school, that's why you got me up here to do this. I was dyslexic, and I didn't know it. I had asthma, so I missed a lot of school, and a lot of pronunciation and word verbiage, and writing skills, etc. And I stuttered a lot. So, this is a real challenge. So thank you very much. It should be great. Yeah, right. Okay, so here we go. Tony. Thank you, Tony, for your time. Tony Acosta. He's very active. Thank you, Tony, for coming. Very active in Salinas, and his contribution is quite lengthy here, and I'm glad we only have a little bit, but again, my situation being what it is. Anyway, here we go. And what we did, we just marked a spot paragraph, and I'm supposed to read this. Thank you very much, Gary. I would have picked maybe a different one, but smaller. Okay, so they decided to go out and strike. They called for a pre-election meeting. And I'm trembling a little bit, so I got to put the paper down, sorry. They called for a pre-election meeting. We showed up, union people only and workers. And the company brought in 7 attorneys to fight us. So imagine 7 people fighting for a pre-election, union election. Anyway, election day comes. I don't remember his name, but the senator or congressman from the area came in a helicopter to the workplace where we were, and with police and everything. That's intimidation. The company did everything they could to stop the workers from voting. Just the way the company did that with police and everything, that showed a lot of power. The effect was people refused to go out and vote. They were intimidated. So some people were, thank you, I can use one of these. Get a little, anyway. The effect of the people, the effect was people refused to go out and vote. They were intimidated. Some people were targeted. We had to also prepare for the likelihood that the company would try to bring La Migra, the INS, and had people and hold people away to deportation. I used to ask people, who's a citizen here? Who's illegal here? Are you ready to be in a car at the highway exit with radios and alarms and alert us if the INS is coming? Very good, Tony. It didn't help in this case, but my plan was to have all those green cards and citizens to run if the Migra showed up. That was the Migra and chased the wrong group. That was the Migra, they chased the wrong group. That was good. You have to try. You have to protect the people. The people, they can't teach that in school. You have to figure it out. All right. Well, I don't want to get too lengthy.
Okay.
The next one is Karen Araujo. I ended up getting involved in the contract negotiations around 1990. I remember asking in my ignorance, is it just the union reps and the hotel side around the bargaining table? And I said, well, I want to be there too. And then other workers decided to come in on their breaks. We had the Hyatt corporate lawyer on one side. The hotel was owned by the Pritzker family then. And the HR people and our union staff, then chairs behind where there would be anywhere from 2 to 10 workers in the room eating lunch or on their break. So when they're talking, Julius J.R. de Vera would say, well, we have folks here right now that can answer that question. Remove this union says, workplace, boss says thing. because we were there and we could talk about it. I remember the Hyatt attorney said, well, you know, we just don't have the money to budge on this. We have this amount and that's it. And I remember saying to her, I understand you're saying you don't have enough money because in your budget there's a certain percentage for profit. What we're saying is take some money out of what you're expecting to be a profit margin and invest that in the workers. Take less for your profit and share it with the workers. That's what we're saying. I was 26 or 27 at the time, and the Hyatt lawyer, she just sat there and she looked at me and she wrote some notes and said they'd have to talk about it or whatever, and they left. And we ended up getting the best contract that had ever been organized for Hyatt. Not because of me, but because we were all there talking. Now, as I recall, I was one of the people who had that idea, but it very well could have been Julius's idea because he's such a brilliant union organizer. It would be just like him to allow me or any of us to think it was our idea. So there may be 10 people who all think it was their idea.
Thank you for choosing that.
Freak your eye off.
Oh, I see. The words of Noemi Armenta. After we continued picketing, and then that's when Caesar came and called a boycott. They finally arrested Cesar around Christmas 1970. So my father and my brother were in jail with Caesar. So we started picketing. We put a booth out there across the street from the jailhouse. Afterwards, they released some of the people, including my father and brother. We had a vigil out there. Somebody stayed there every single night as long as somebody was in there. Caesar was the last one that was in there. And when he came out, he started assigning people to go to boycotts in different cities. My brother, Modesto Moreno, began working with Caesar after that. He became one of his guards when Caesar was in town. My brother was a good friend of Roberto Garcia, too. He became involved with the UFW and organized one of the marches. I think the one that was coming in from the south, it was a big, big march. When Caesar came out of jail, it was the day before Christmas, 1970. I think it was the same day that Coretta King came into town, and Ethel Kennedy. They were all there. My whole family was there too. There were a lot of people out there, a lot of farm workers, and then there were a lot of Anglo people there yelling and throwing insults at Coretta King and Ethel Kennedy. Some people actually came up and tried to spit in their faces. It was really, really sad to see. But it kind of made you stronger, you know, to continue the fight. We knew that what we were doing was right. The struggle, Ethel Kennedy, they were calling her names. There was a big hearing in Salinas after that, and we all became members of the United Farm Workers. My father, my brother, my sister, my other brother, we all became members and continued working in different places, like in the tomatoes and lettuce and in the fields. My father actually ended up retiring because he had a stroke and then a heart attack. But my brother and my sister and I continued working in the grapes in Soledad for Palmasan Winery. The company had a contract with the union, and there were a few companies that had a contract, and they treated us very well. We had good benefits, and in 1973, Caesar came down and asked us to volunteer to go work at the UFW, just for a couple of weeks in Coachella. And my father volunteered to go. And since my father did, I volunteered. And my younger sister, Olga, volunteered. And I think Elvira de la Rosa, she was a sister of Hector de la Rosa. She did too. She was not a farm worker, but she decided to go with us. So we went to Coachella, and I think there were some people from King City and Soledad who went. Caesar used to call it La División del Norte, named after Pancho Villa's army. There must have been 30 people.
Oh, nice. All right, we'll try this one again. I got a little whiff of confidence with these two ladies. So I felt like it's going to be good. So anyway, that's only my thought. But here we go. I got the privilege of reading about Roberto Garcia. Roberto Garcia was the organizer and bodyguard with Caesar and stuff, and made it back in the 70s. So let's see what we have here. Okay, so I'm going to start. My mom and dad got organized into La Causa. what got them into it, I don't know. I think they came back with people from a picnic. And they were all pumped up on organizing. It's like you said, the growers were the best organizers. I'll say it again. It's like you said, the growers were the best organizers. The growers and the foremans. Injustice is an awesome recruiter. Caesar said, nothing like that. A bunch of the guys who were the warriors of the struggle wondered if the UFW or anything else are the forgotten ones. We're seldom mentioned in the history books, but the kids need to hear from guys like you and guys like me. Okay, so this guy named Juan Martinez, his name's there. Juan Martinez, actually is true, because all they hear is about people who come after us. All these people who made their stand on the shoulders of guys like you and me. There are a lot of families here, and they have a lot of history together. We need to record these guys as much as we can. We saved the building, the jail. Yeah, and that's a lawsuit that we filed at the old Monterey County Jail there in Aliso. We saved the old jail from demolition. And that's why they had Cesar Chavez, and that's what we used to leverage to make it a historical site. It was built in 1932. They're not going to knock it down. It's a state landmark and a national landmark, and that's what we struggled to create. So do I go on here? Does it go over here? Or could I stop right there? My choice, I'm going to go for it. I like this story. And you're going to like this too when you read it. It's got Marshall Gans and Chudar and a bunch of stuff, so I'm kind of interested. But I want to back off because I know we all want to talk later, and this is kind of like lengthy, and I want you all to read it because I got you a little bit excited. So Roberto Garcia, being a farmer, I hope you all read it.
This is from the chapter titled "And Todd Jealous and Fred Jealous." So I'll establish who's saying what, kind of with my body, a little bit with my voice, and I won't keep saying Ann and Fred. So at first, Fred Jealous. Who knows what pulls you to go in these directions, truthfully and unconsciously? My father in my early life was so much more loving than my mother. My mother was much too busy being perfect to be loving. Here was this man who was deeply loving of me in my early life, but who turned violent when I was 6. So in the background, underneath this violence, is this truly loving relationship. Anne says, I think it's all of it, all that DNA. He has a lot of ancestors. We both do. We were activists of one type or another, so that's in there too. We are more than our parents. We are the sum of all who have gone before us. In my book, co-written with Colleen Haskell, Combined Destinies, Whites Sharing Grief About Racism, I talk about how much the oppressor is harmed by oppressing others, terribly harmed. I'd much rather be in the position of being the oppressed than be in the position of the oppressor in terms of living with myself. So white people who are perpetrators of racism because of the color of their skin and the values they hold look at someone like Fred and assume that they share values. I know that I am sometimes identified with people whom I have little in common. Assumptions get us into all kinds of trouble. I think that is spiritual death, to be actively oppressing others. I believe that when people are virulently racist, they are destroying their own humanity. I would rather be killed, have my body dead, than destroy my own spirit, my own soul, my own humanity by perpetuating racism in ways that I've seen from other people. I think that Bob Zellner does a really good job when in my book he writes about his dad being a minister and also being a member of the Klan and having a nervous breakdown as a consequence. As he wrote, you cannot preach on Sunday and practice hate the rest of the week and keep your mind, keep your sanity. There are a lot of crazy people like that out there, preaching love and practicing hate. How do you get people to address it? We are all heavily invested in believing we're a good person. We all want to believe that regardless of whether we're a member of the Klan or a member of the Unitarian Church in Monterey, we want to believe that we're good people, and regardless of our behavior, we will defend that belief with all kinds of stories and tales. Most of us don't have enough self-esteem to be accountable at a level that would actually produce change.
The last segment we're going to share is Taina Vargas Edmond. So I stayed involved with Dignity and Power Now and CURB, and then I moved up here to Salinas and worked at Dorothy's Place. I moved here so I could be closer to Richard, who is my husband now. He is at Soledad State Prison. Working at Dorothy's Place, I had some spare time, so I started looking around for groups who were organizing around prison reform or abolition. And that's when I came across MILPA. Through MILPA, I got connected with the NAACP and the Peace Resource Center. We formed a coalition for jail reform, which began all the work we've been doing this last year. The ultimate goal for me is prison abolition. And when I say abolition, I don't mean, oh, just tear down the walls and let the prisoners run free in complete anarchy. No, that's not what I mean at all. What I mean when I say prison abolition is completely changing the way that we look at crime and punishment, framing it instead as harm and rehabilitation and transformation. Making things right instead of just punishing somebody and getting some kind of retribution because they did something wrong. We can see very clearly that that does not work. It does not make any of our communities Oh, thank you. Does not make any of our communities safer. It costs us billions of dollars every single year, and in order to pay for it, we are divesting from schools and social services and healthcare, mental health services, and we're just making a very unhealthy, uneducated, traumatized society, and we wonder why we're not safe. So I envision, rather than using retributive or punitive justice, using restorative and transformative justice. Restorative meaning focusing on repairing relationships where somebody caused harm or hurt somebody, and work on making that right with that person or that family, paying retributions to that family or that person that you hurt, instead of paying some kind of debt to the state with your time. Transformative justice focuses more on creating systems that are not oppressive. Systems where education, well-being, mental health are invested in, and where entire communities react to harm that has been done, instead of police or the state having to react to harm that has been done. I'm not saying that I don't think we would have a world where we don't need some form of removal from society, removing them from the community to keep others safe. I understand that will probably always be necessary to some degree, but the way that we've been doing it is just all wrong. It's just backwards. It doesn't work taking people out of their communities and just warehousing them and using them as slave labor for the state. They're not receiving training or skills that they need. They're not being healed from the trauma that they had in their lives that caused them to hurt other people. And then they are being further traumatized by being incarcerated. They come home, and because they were separated from their community and their friends and their family, they don't have support systems to come to. It's like coming home to strangers. They are legally shut out of support systems. They can't get access to education grants or public housing. They can't get food stamps or any kind of financial aid. And then the state is boggled that we have an almost 70% recidivism rate. We need to completely reverse the way we think about crime and punishment and completely change that way of thinking.
All right, thank Maestra Ana. All right, well, at this point, we'd like to bring up our state senator, our majority leader, and a good friend and a visionary who's always a pleasure to be with. And Bill, thanks for coming tonight. It's all yours.
Un aplauso, Gary, Juan, Karen. Well, good evening, and thank you to Gary, Juan, and Karen, and all of the people that pulled together to bring what started as a dream into this publication. Gary sent it to me earlier this week up in Sacramento, and I took it home with me, and my problem, we work long days in Sacramento. I love reading. But a good book lasts me for months because I only get through a page or two and I'm sound asleep. But this one actually, I was jumping around people I knew and almost more fascinated by people I didn't know because it gave me a chance to learn about fellow activists in the area. One of the things that I've only sampled this, and I think you will also find it's just a real treat, and each chapter, each person profiled is different. There's a commonality that I found really fascinating, and that commonality is virtually all of the stories included people talking not just about their historical roots of activism, but what they're continuing to do today. And once an activist, always an activist, because people are compelled to be part of solutions, to be part of community, to be part of making the community we live in better. I think Gary mentioned in his comments that one of the goals in pulling these histories together, these oral histories, was to try to bridge what's been called the lettuce curtain, segmented communities that don't talk to each other. Just as this book took intention to happen, what our charge is moving forward is to continue to show intention in what it is we need to do to break down the barriers. You can wish the barriers away, but they won't disappear. It's only through intention. So I know some organizations will say, well, we made a phone call or we invited people to the meeting, but nobody came. What we learned with UFW, and I think as you've heard from some of the testimonies, a number of people profiled, developed their organizing skills in the UFW. Not all, but many. And many of those here this evening, I have the honor of knowing because of my work with the UFW. And there was a theme among many of those people, the strict discipline of organizing, the butcher paper, the targeted going out for votes, whether it was a union campaign or electoral campaign. Nothing is left to hope. Nothing is left to a maybe. The discipline that we learned and has carried into other movements, you identify the people that you seek to organize, and you report on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day. In Delano with Marshall, it was 6 a.m. in the morning, out to the fields, noon check-in, 6 p.m. at night, third check-in. So 3 times within an 18-hour period of accountability. And then we see those people that gained that training have brought it to other work. I found one chapter absolutely fascinating. It was about a woman named Dana Kent. I didn't see I didn't see Dana's interview that I think Gary did. I didn't share the foreword I wrote with Dana, but there was a commonality. We both talked about how the union brought us together to give us these skills and to give us a path that has been a shared path for almost 40 years, in which I think has been passed on to our daughters, and we're getting an early start on the grandkids as well. And that's the power of political families. And I know this book, this project is nonpartisan, but at its core, it is very political, because it captures people's political engagement and activism. And more often than not in electoral politics, but in mobilizing people politics around an issue, whether it was the Inez Garcia trial, which Dana and I were working at the union when that trial was going on, and it's how we met Corey Miller, because she was mobilizing people to this farm worker woman who stood up against a contratista who had raped her successively, and she finally defended herself and shot him and was tried for murder. And she had a hung jury the first time with Charles Gary representing her, and she was acquitted the second time with Susan Jordan. Thank you. We're at the stage in our life now where we finish each other's sentences. And more often than not, it's Dana who retrieves the missing name. But just a sample of some of the people in the book: Chava Bustamante, Phyllis Sparsa, Juan Martinez, Tony Acosta, Sabino, many here this evening, David Serena, Karen Araujo, just a sampling, all engaged today in organizing and activism. Tony Acosta and I met. I was an attorney at CRLA. Tony was a farm worker. And I think Ricardo Villapando had identified him. We were doing pesticide education in the community, and we got Channel 8, the NBC affiliate, that in those days had a Spanish language program every morning from 6 to 6:30 or something. And we got KSBW to agree to do public service announcements in Spanish. And Tony became our poster child for these PSA announcements. And they were very successful, and one way we measured the success is these women kept coming into CRLA asking us, "Who's this guy Tony Acosta? Can you make an introduction?" But that was my first connection with Tony, who for the last 30 years has been involved in grassroots organizing, citizenship campaigns, empowerment campaigns, political campaigns. We often are mobilized by a vision or a dream of an objective, but ultimately the measurement of what we gain is the process of trying to get there. And we often tilt at windmills. We don't always get to that objective. We still have so much work to do. But it's the connections we make in getting there. Those are the memories, and those are some of the memories captured in these oral histories. I mentioned Corey Miller, who passed this past year, Rosemary Matson and Howard, who passed earlier, Rosemary last year as well. There's a great tribute to them and their words. And I was thinking about the lettuce curtain again. Part of bridging the lettuce curtain was Howard and Rosemary with a home in Carmel Valley, providing sanctuary to Cesar Chavez, who had death threats during the 1970 lettuce strike and found sanctuary at a home in the Carmel Valley. And again, too often we're the ones responsible for enforcing false divisions. And only through boldness and intention do we break down those barriers. And they may be physical in some measurement, but more often than not, they're psychological and they're self-imposed. And so I think one of the lessons or inspirations from this collection is to embolden all of us in our future continuing ongoing work. History projects too often get bogged down in remembering the past. It's important to preserve those memories of the past because the straight media, educational institutions don't always do it. Howard Zinn did it. Gary mentioned Howard Zinn and the People's History of the United States. Every year we pass legislation in Sacramento recommending the inclusion of different excluded minorities in the history of California history books. And we can never succeed in getting an immediate commitment because the budget isn't there to change the school books. So the caveat is that when there's the next publication, it will include history of the Filipino community or the Japanese immigrant community. But little by little, we're making progress to communities of inclusion. I just want to close, and again, kind of bringing it to the present. You know, we're entering the Martin Luther King weekend. Dana and I will be at the march, as I'm sure many of you will, on Monday, gathering between 11 and noon at the Social Services Office on Obama Way, formerly known as Broadway in Seaside. And it's a time to memorialize not only Martin Luther King's sacrifice and contribution, but the sacrifice and contributions of a movement whose dream and vision is still not fulfilled. Yesterday, the horror of another shooting of a black teenager in Chicago, and this era of videotape, what I think unfortunately has been going on for decades, is now being captured and documented. And the persecutors of injustice are being captured on film for communities and eventually courtrooms to judge. This most recent one, a teenager, unarmed, running from the police, shot down in the back, then handcuffed, and then one of the officers with a foot on him like a trophy of a shot animal. And the fact that the responses have been largely nonviolent, not always nonviolent, but the rage and anger that is provoked is righteous rage and anger. And we have to remember that a movement for nonviolence, as Caesar taught and as Gandhi demonstrated, does not mean a movement without militancy. It does not mean a movement that is not radical in the challenging of the status quo, and whether it's institutional racism or shooting young people down who are unarmed in the street, the response can be both nonviolent and militant and radical and challenge the status quo. And as Savino and others from the union know, the power of nonviolence that Caesar led, the growers in the institutional powers don't know how fortunate they were that the man challenging them had embraced Gandhian principles. It was a movement that was not void of violence, but it was a movement that was nonviolent. In 1973, on the picket lines in Delano and Arvin and Lamont, 5-foot-tall women with no more than a picket sign were being beaten first by Teamsters, then by Kern County sheriffs. It was a double whammy. And their only defense was to put their arms up above their heads. And they spilled blood on those highways. And the martyrs who were killed, Naji Daifula and Juan de la Cruz, they didn't have weapons, but they were the victims of institutional power and violence. And it often takes a nonviolent movement to expose the violence of the status quo, the violence of the culture. So we live in a society where more people now are dying from guns than from car accidents. And we see electeds who feel compelled to soft pedal efforts for gun reform for fear of losing office because the NRA will go after them. As President Obama said the other night, we need to stand up in these elections in 2016 and make it clear that communities, that the people, that the voters will no longer elect those who aren't willing to engage in meaningful change to protect the future teenagers from being shot down in the streets. So this is a celebration tonight, and I apologize for taking us down a path. So let me just bring us back to a little more celebratory tone. And that is, I highly recommend taking the time to learn about the people profiled in this book. And as is mentioned in the foreword or the introduction by Gary, I think for each person profiled, we know 10, 15, 20 who weren't profiled in this book, but who will be caught in edition 2, edition 3, edition 4. But again, I just want to applaud the many steps that have gone into the publication of this book, to thank all of you for being here tonight, especially to thank the contributors who helped offset the costs of this, and to the heroes and sheroes who fill this room tonight. We're just getting warmed up in a movement for fulfilling the dreams we all share. And you know, we sometimes get so pushed down and on the defensive that we lose the ability to articulate the dream, the vision. What do we want our communities to look like? Our neighborhoods, our schools. Let's start describing that vision, because organizing 1A, you've got to be able to put up on that butcher paper what's your goal. Then we can map out the path to get there. So I look forward to that walk. It's a long march, but we sustain each other. Thank you very much.
How do you follow that? I mean, my goodness. So, my name is David Reichert. I'm a professor at CSU Monterey Bay, and I've just been, Karen, Juan, and Gary just asked me to say a few words about the relationship we've been developing over the last year or so. I think while this book was coming together. We have at CSUMB in my program, in the humanities program, an oral history project or program. We have an oral history course. We have faculty that teach these classes. I teach history courses. And about a year, I think it's about a year and a half ago, they came to the university to talk to us about how we might partner on this project. Like, what would this look like? And I have to tell you, when you have a meeting with 3 organizers who come with a list of about 20 or 30 things, here's what we can do. You know, I thought this was an exploratory kind of meeting. They had a list, very long list. And we're still working on that list, by the way. We have a lot more work to do. But a couple of the things that came out of that meeting have come to fruition that were part of sort of contributing to the work that this project is doing. The first is Kristen Maffollette, who's a lecturer in my department, taught an oral history class in the fall. And they contributed a couple interviews. Students interviewed maybe some of you here. I think Mickey was one of that group. I see some other folks too. And so they have built on the work that started this project. So there is going to be a part 2, right? Volume 2. There's more work coming. And Kristen could not be here today, but she has written a little bit of a blurb about what happened that fall, and I thought I'd read it to you all. This fall, students enrolled in CSUMB's Oral History and Community Memory Service Learning course continued the interviews begun by the People's Oral History Project. The class interviewed 14 local activists and changemakers, including Darby Moss-Worth, the most active and well-known advocate in Carmel Valley, Kay Klein of Sustainable Seaside, Mickey Welsh of the ACLU, and Tim McManus of COPA. Through the interviews, students reported stories of the roots of their activism, learning how they became involved in their causes and what sustained their work. The interviews not only broadened the students' worldview, but helped them forge deep connections across generations and history. The class selected stories from each narrator and shared them at a well-attended public reading, which I went to, by the way. It was really very good. Interviews are archived and preserved at CSUMB. Students are very excited to continue this work in the fall, and if anyone would like to be interviewed, please contact me, Kristen Follett, at CSUMB. If you can talk to me afterwards, and I'll connect you to. But that's one example of how we've partnered with the People's Oral History Project and are continuing the work. Another example was a class I taught in the fall, a Topics in Social History course. My class, we're a group of juniors and seniors, and one of the goals of the class was to make history really hands-on, to say, hey, what does it mean to study history in our community, in our local community? And how do we capture those histories and make them public? That was one of our goals. So I invited Gary and Juan to come to my class, and they totally inspired the students to really dig into some of the local histories. And a couple of things happened. They generously shared an early version of the book. So the book had not yet been published, but it was sort of in manuscript form. So they generously shared those interviews with my students. They read a number of those interviews and were inspired to dig deeper in their research. So in that project, some of the voices of those interviews that are in the book have ended up in their research. They built on those oral histories and then built a website that was sort of a profile in local social history. Many of the stories they profile were activist histories. There's a section on the UFW, there's a section on environmental activism. So they did a lot of very interesting stuff inspired by the work of all of you, all the activism that you have done in the community. So that's kind of where we have started. Now we have a lot of ideas for the future. One of the things I'm very excited about is assigning this book. I can't wait to teach my next history course where all the students purchase this book. I can't wait. So I just want to, in closing, I just want to thank all of you for your commitment to the social change and the work you're doing in the community. It's inspiring students at CSUMB in the studies that they're doing here at the university. And I want to thank the People's Oral History Project. Gary, Juan, and Karen, particularly for the hard work that they've done in bringing this to our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure working with you. It certainly has. And one thing I forgot to mention that the people that volunteered tonight to help us put this event on: Belia Garcia, Liz and Bob Fisher, Jean Turner, and McDowell, Bob Coble, Mibs McCarthy, and Carolyn Johnson. One of the things you learn, of course, is if you don't thank people, they don't come back. So you're stuck doing everything yourself. I also want to just let you know my sister is here, Vicky, and she took an airplane from Atlanta to be here. And our friend Diane Kaiser, both of which who lived here in the 70s and were troublemakers in the 70s. So you want to introduce my sister right here. I haven't seen her in a while. She came out for this. She was a big supporter of the book and the project. And, we lived together here in Salinas and we, raised hell. So I'm so glad to see you both. Let's see, what else? What we're gonna do now is basically Karen and Juan and I are gonna sign autographed books out in the lobby. And Bob and Liz Fisher and Ann agreed to, for folks that want, we did this, and actually this is, I must thank Sabina Lopez for what, I know some people want to talk tonight to each other, so Liz Fisher, and Liz and Bob and Ann are going to facilitate sort of a discussion group here. You know, you can participate if you want or not, but a lot of people have stuff they got to say. I got to tell you, and you got to say it, and there's folks here to record it. Wes White, there's Wes, okay? So go take another look at the exhibits. We'll be here tomorrow, of course, from 2 to 4:30, doing more readings and more discussion of our history. We'll be at the Oldermeyer Center at the end of the Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. National Holiday Celebration on Monday in Seaside. We'll be there from 12 to 3 at Oldermeyer Center. You can catch us there as well, or tomorrow from 2 to 4:30 right here, okay? So thank you very much. We'll be signing, books in the lobby, and if you'd like to do a round table here and continue discussion, please do so. And Ann McDowell and Liz and Bob Fisher will facilitate. And again, one thing I forgot to mention, all of these things we have out here, all of these historical documents and items, they need to go somewhere. They can't stay in Juan and mine's garage. They need to be preserved properly because they represent a lot of history. They're not just things. Every one of those items you see is a campaign that people, there's blood, sweat, and tears involved. They gotta go somewhere. So at some point, we're gonna need your help. And David's working on that. We hopefully will have some kind of professional archive where the history of people who are activists in this county will be honored and kept and used as an educational tool for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you.